It's starting to look like New Orleans Saints cornerback Marshon Lattimore will be back with the team in 2024 after all. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we finally get some positive news around the New Orleans Saints and Marshon Lattimore. Maybe some things that make you feel like he might not be on the move after all. So in today's episode, we're going to break down what all that means, how that means that the New Orleans Saints could potentially be in line to have one of the top secondaries again in the NFL, the ripple effects of keeping Marshon Lattimore and what it could mean for fellow corners Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, and rookie Kool-Aid McKinstry. And to lead this all off, Dennis Allen gave some pretty nice comments, but do they actually mean that Marshon Lattimore won't be traded? Let's explore all the different possibilities here as we continue on with this week at Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being an everydayer and for making us your first listen of the day every day here on the Locked On Saints podcast, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. I'll tell you more about Game Time here in a little bit, but it sounds like it might be game time for the New Orleans Saints and Marshon Lattimore. The New Orleans Saints were holding their Hall of Fame celebrity golf tournament, and as a part of the event, typically Dennis Allen, head coach, general manager Mickey Loomis, and a couple of players, typically Cam Jordan and another player, will speak. And during that time, Dennis Allen said the following about Marshon Lattimore and kind of where things stand in terms of progress with getting number 23 back in a New Orleans Saints jersey in 2024 and back at the facility in time to get started for the season.
I had a conversation with him probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. I thought it was a positive conversation. And so, we're moving forward.
Now, it's a short clip. It's a brief sentence or a couple of sentences, but it does sound like the most promising, positive, new information and outlook that we've heard about Marshon Lattimore thus far. And look, we've gone back and forth on this a whole bunch, right? At one point, I was like 70% sure that the Saints were going to trade Marshon Lattimore away. Then I dropped to 50-50. Then I went 70% that he was going to stick around. Then went back to 50-50. And now there's this feeling like 70% he's going to stick around again. So we don't really know exactly what's going to happen. But the idea of a positive conversation and the statement of we're ready to move forward, and so we're going to move forward, or we are moving forward, those two things tend to combine with moving forward with positivity, not moving forward with trading him away. So if that is the case, then that would mean that Marshon Lattimore would be ready to suit up for the New Orleans Saints in 2024. And look, this wouldn't be the first time that Dennis Allen has done this, that he's gone out and repaired the relationship with a, let's say, disgruntled or rumored to be disgruntled player. Remember back in 2022 when he assumed the head coaching role, he went out to Los Angeles, met with Michael Thomas, and effectively convinced him to come back for 2 more years. Now, that didn't end the way that you would have wanted that story to end, because it came to a tumultuous end in which Michael Thomas was not re-signed by the team this offseason, and he is now a free agent, still looking for a home, likely still rehabbing his injury. I don't think he's on the market because teams don't want to work with him, or I don't think that he's still on the market because teams think that he doesn't have anything left in the tank. It's that he's probably still rehabbing. So we'll see exactly what ends up happening with him. But you hope that this arrangement, conversation that Dennis Allen and Marshon Lattimore had reportedly, not reportedly, it's from Dennis Allen himself 2 or 3 weeks ago, will lead to Marshon Lattimore being back with the team in 2024, and hopefully a greater long-term solution than what we saw with Michael Thomas as well. Marshon Lattimore not being traded makes this team better. That's good news. This team gets worse if Marshon Lattimore gets traded away. It stays the same if he's traded away and there were no other moves made at the cornerback spot. it makes the team better if he stays and is not traded away, and Kool-Aid McKinstry is added, right? And that's what we ended up seeing this offseason. So him sticking around helps make this team better. So does this mean that Marshon Lattimore for sure won't be traded? No, but it is the most positive outlook that we have been given overtly by anyone from the New Orleans Saints organization. A lot of times it was a lot of like talking about how the trade market impacts things, how they're not actively looking for a trade, things like that, but nothing really that made you feel like the relationship between the team and Marshon Lattimore had taken some steps forward. This conversation, this quote from Dennis Allen makes things feel like the connection between the team, the relationship between the team and Marshon Lattimore looks better. So I will say, while it does not give you the idea that he's absolutely 100% not going to be traded, it does give you a solid indication that he may not be traded. We'll see how things go. What does not trading Marshon Lattimore away mean? Well, first of all, it means that you're absolutely loaded when it comes to the cornerback position. You've got Paulson Adebo. If you're keeping Marshon Lattimore, those are your two starters on the outside. You've got Alontae Taylor, probably in the slot. You've got Kool-Aid McKinstry, who was just drafted in the second round. Bonus thing on Kool-Aid McKinstry coming up later on in the show, by the way. So it does give you a very, very solid cornerback class. I mean, it allows you to keep your same cornerback class that you had last year, but you've upgraded from Isaac Yiadom to Kool-Aid McKinstry, or what we assume will be an upgrade. I guess we'll have to wait and see Kool-Aid McKinstry out on the field. It's kind of like when we were talking about have the Saints really improved roster-wise. We put all the rookies in an unknown. So I guess we have to have the same respect here with Kool-Aid McKinstry. But if he turns out to be the talent that everyone expects him to be, then you've upgraded your fourth cornerback spot, because your fourth cornerback either is Kool-Aid McKinstry or it becomes another one of those other players because Kool-Aid McKinstry climbs the ladder a little bit. We're going to get into the ripple effects of keeping Marshon Lattimore, what it means for all these players in a little bit. But bottom line for the New Orleans Saints is that it makes them better, and it makes that cornerback room really, really good. I spoke with somebody within the New Orleans Saints organization not too long ago that was excited about the fact of having 4 starting caliber corners, because you're always going to have to turn to that fourth guy at some point. The Saints look to be in position again to do exactly that. Now, could Marshon Lattimore start the season with the New Orleans Saints and then still be moved later? That's a yes. That's a chance. A yes as in yes, that could happen. Not a yes as in yes, that's definitely going to happen. But you could see something at the trade deadline with Marshon Lattimore. You could see something in the 2025 offseason. And this would all just depend upon how the relationship upholds, maintains, if it has been indeed repaired. Does it remain repaired, or do we see, like we saw with Michael Thomas, and then more tumultuous, experiences coming down the road? If that were to be the case, then you could see Marshon Lattimore being moved before the 2025 season or at the trade deadline, where the value might be really high. And that would be something that you would look at if the New Orleans Saints are either performing incredibly well and they feel like they can move on from Marshon Lattimore and not miss a beat, or they're performing incredibly poorly and they've begun the fire sale by moving off of Marshon Lattimore. I think it will tell one of those two stories. So while it doesn't fully put a bow on the Marshon Lattimore story and the conversations and the swirling rumors around his trades, things like that, this did feel like a different statement than what we have heard from the New Orleans Saints in the past, and does kind of nudge me back over into the 70% realm, if I were to give a percentage to it, that Marshon Lattimore will be a New Orleans Saint in 2024. Let's see if there's no offer that comes up. There's not a team that gets desperate because of an injury at the position during training camp or something like that. That might change the Saints' minds. But this seems more likely to say that Marshon Lattimore will be a New Orleans Saint in 2024 than not. Let's see if it stays that way post June 1. Coming up next, let's assume that the New Orleans Saints are indeed keeping Marshon Lattimore. Well, there's a lot of ripple effects. Let's discuss what this means for fellow corners Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, and of course, rookie cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry. Got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, the one and only place that I go to grab tickets to my favorite events. We just had our Locked On Podcast Network retreat out in southern Utah. A couple of the guys stuck around because we were flying in and out of Vegas. They stuck around in Vegas for a day and ended up picking up some Game Time tickets for the Blue Man Group. How cool is that? It's not just for the NFL games, for the NBA games, all that. You can also check out theater shows, you can check out comedy, concerts, and so much more. And they ended up getting tickets that all got all the way upgraded to like the front of the arena and all this other stuff. So it was awesome and it worked out great. So if you're looking for something, if you've got an event that's around you, something like that that you want to take part of, Game Time is absolutely the place to go. And of course, if you're here in New Orleans, you're probably going to want to get them Sean Payton tickets, right? Sean Payton coming back to the New Orleans Saints stadium in the 2024 season. Las Vegas, Derek Carr's former team coming here. Lots of high-profile New Orleans Saints games to check out tickets for as well as the time gets closer. So take all the guesswork out of buying tickets by heading over to Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family, just because Marshon Lattimore might be sticking around for 2024 doesn't mean that there won't be other moves at the cornerback position. Let's take a look at a bunch of different possibilities that come from Marshon Lattimore potentially staying in New Orleans for 2024. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, after this, to go and check out Locked On Sports Today, our 24/7 national sports media stream over on YouTube, the first of its kind that you can find on YouTube. You can also find it on the Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. You don't have to deal with all the yelling and screaming of some of those other networks. You want all the biggest stories from the local experts that know the teams the best. Locked On Sports Today is going to give you all that without all of the arguments. So go and check it out today over on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube stream, as well as on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. So just because Marshon Lattimore is sticking around with New Orleans, it doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be some other moves at the cornerback spot. Or let's say it this way, even if he sticks around. Because again, it's a good vote of confidence. It's a good indication, but we still don't know 100% for sure that Marshon Lattimore is going to be a New Orleans Saint in 2024. So I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but there is certainly a positive to be taken from all of this. So let's start off here with the different possibilities that impact Paulson Adebo, the starting corner opposite Marshon Lattimore. Now, Paulson Adebo is going into a contract year. Does keeping Marshon Lattimore in 2024 impact the way that Paulson Adebo is treated? Perhaps the Saints say, you know what? Marshon Lattimore is going to be around for 2024. Not so sure about 2025. So let's get a contract extension done with Paulson Adebo as quickly as possible. Contract for Paulson Adebo could get done over the course of the offseason, or as we've seen the Saints do with players like Marshon Lattimore himself, as well as Carl Granderson last year, Demario Davis a few years ago. They don't have a problem with re-signing a player after the season begins. We've seen each of those signings that I mentioned happen within the first 3 weeks of the year. So the Saints could go that route again with Paulson Adebo, end up either re-signing him and extending him over the course of the it's more extending, not re-signing. Sorry, I used the wrong phrase there, but they can extend him before this offseason is over, or they could extend him after the season begins. So that could definitely be a way that they look to go, is that, hey, we're not so sure about the longevity of the relationship with Marshon Lattimore. Grateful that he's going to be back in 2024 if he is, but we want to safeguard and make sure you lock down the other guy that has produced quite well for you. And particularly last year where he had a phenomenal year, Paulson Adebo did. The other option would be to not extend Paulson Adebo, which I think would be a bad choice. They might say, you know what, we're not going to extend him this season, but could look to re-sign him after this season. So they could do that, but it could potentially put them in a bad situation. Or if Paulson Adebo goes out there and has another spectacular year, then all of a sudden you're paying him a lot more money, and you're spending a lot more money than you would have spent this offseason to extend him. Now, if I'm Paulson Adebo and I'm Paulson Adebo's representatives, I might be saying, you know what, it might be better to wait until after the season because we think our guy's going to ball out. So it might be nice to do that. Now, the issue with that is, what if you don't? What if you get hurt? All these other things. So it could be in everyone's best interest to get Paulson Adebo re-signed this offseason or in this season, rather than let him get through the 2024 year and then head into 2025 as a free agent. But they could potentially say, you know what, we've got Marshon, that's going to be good for another couple of years. Don't have to spend top corner money on the other corner if they don't want to. How about for Alontae Taylor? Alontae Taylor is a really interesting conversation because if Marshon Lattimore returns in 2024, Alontae Taylor is probably not going to beat Paulson Adebo for the starting role opposite Marshon Lattimore. We've just seen how well Paulson Adebo plays, how much that has worked with Marcus Robertson, with Joe Woods. It's going to be a long shot for Alontae Taylor to, usurp Paulson Adebo, not because Alontae Taylor doesn't have the talent. He absolutely has the talent. However, the opportunity just simply might not be there for him because Paulson Adebo has been really, really, really good. So the ripple effect then becomes if Marshon Lattimore returns, Alontae has no opportunity to compete to play on the outside and would again have to play in the slot in 2024. He struggled there in 2023. It's not his natural position. I'm sure it's a position he probably doesn't want to play. I mentioned in yesterday's episode where we looked at breakout players for 2023, or 2024, which by the way, today we were supposed to do most underappreciated, most undervalued players on the New Orleans Saints roster. But obviously this news is much bigger. And tomorrow's show is much bigger than that too. So we're going to not worry about the undervalued players until later on, which might be me undervaluing them, but that's okay. That's some content we can save for later. So one of the things that I mentioned in that episode though, was that Alontae Taylor is starting to look like the next Zach Bond, right? They drafted Zach Bond, who had 12 and a half sacks his final season at Wisconsin, and then he didn't start rushing the passer until his contract year. Alontae Taylor, somebody that's played outside corner his entire career, comes to New Orleans, ends up getting opportunities as a starting corner outside based on some injuries, played well. And then in 2023 was moved to the slot, struggled in the slot, but then when he moved to the outside, he immediately got interceptions because of injuries and things like that. He was able to run to the outside there. And so are we going to see Alontae Taylor's talent wasted by playing him in a position that or not necessarily wasted, but we're going to see his talent not necessarily be able to come to fruition because he's being asked to play in a spot where he doesn't play and where his skills aren't, right? His skills are over on the outside. So could that then, so the ripple effect of keeping Marshon Lattimore to Alontae Taylor is that he stays in the slot. The further ripple effect of that is how happy or unhappy is Alontae Taylor with that? Does Alontae Taylor end up being in a situation where he's like, you know what, I don't want to do this. I want to play at a different position. I want to be somewhere else. And then potentially we see one of those weird offseason secondary moves, defensive back moves that we've seen over the course of the past couple of years. C.J. Gardner-Johnson traded away, Bradley Roby not re-signed, all these other things. And then could we see something like that happen with Alontae Taylor? Now, I certainly hope not, because you want this team to have 4 starting caliber cornerbacks. And the team wants to have 4 starting caliber cornerbacks. And there is no doubt that Alontae Taylor is a starting caliber cornerback. It's just that he's a little bit more of a perimeter guy than a slot guy. So finding a way to kind of pacify that might end up being in the New Orleans Saints' best interest. Now, the next big thing is where Kool-Aid McKinstry fits in. Now, I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think that even if the Saints have all 4 of these corners on their roster, Marshon Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, and Alontae Taylor, along with Kool-Aid McKinstry, even if they have all 4 of them on the roster, all 17 games of the 2024 season, I believe Kool-Aid McKinstry will start a game outside at corner. I believe that it will happen. Just because we haven't seen Paulson Adebo be able to play every single game so far, although he has been majority healthy. So I don't want to try to slap a tag on him that doesn't need to be there, right? He's just missed a couple of games here and there. And then, of course, Marshon Lattimore, one of the big conversations around him has been him missing, ample games over the course of the past couple of years. Now, I'm not going to throw the injury prone tag on Marshon Lattimore. I still refuse to do that because getting your kidney lacerated or whatever, and then having somebody roll up on your foot, those aren't your fault. So I think that if there is any injury at the position, then Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to get his opportunity to be able to jump out there. But if Alontae Taylor ends up getting moved as a part of that further ripple effect, then does Kool-Aid McKinstry end up getting an opportunity in the slot? And then does he perform better in the slot as well? Because he, much like Alontae Taylor, hasn't gotten opportunities in the slot before. So we'll have to see where all that goes. So that's just some of the ripple effects that I think happen with the Marshon Lattimore retention, should he be retained for 2024. By the way, when it comes to Kool-Aid McKinstry, Cooper DeJean, the Philadelphia Eagles cornerback or defensive back, has now signed his contract. He was the 40th overall selection in the second round of the 2024 NFL draft. Kool-Aid McKinstry was the 41st overall selection. So now that 40th overall selection contract is done and you can work off of that contract as a starting place for your 41st overall selection, I wouldn't be surprised to see Kool-Aid McKinstry's contract maybe actually signed before training camp, which would buck the trend of what we've seen. There were some reports about him already signing his deal, but that hasn't been reported by the team, so I'm not running with those. And so we'll see exactly where everything goes with Kool-Aid McKinstry, but that might end up helping now that Cooper DeJean's contract is done. Up next, the New Orleans Saints will again field one of the NFL's best secondaries. What will it look like? Let's break that down as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sports betting partners here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's winner take all time right now in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own as well, because right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That means you can go and put $5 down on a heavy favorite. For instance, this evening, the Boston Celtics are going to be starting off their series up against the Indiana Pacers. The Celtics are favored by 10 points. They're minus 10 on the board right now. So highly favored to win this matchup. You can go and bet on a heavy favorite like that, put $5 down, win that bet, and then all of a sudden you got $150 in bonus bets to bet on spreads, player props, money lines, and much more. All you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started, and you'll be able to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. If the New Orleans Saints manage to keep Marshon Lattimore in the building in 2024, it does solidify the New Orleans Saints having one of the best secondaries in the NFL. We appreciate you very much, as always, for joining us here for another episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we are your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to go through some more of the comments and things like that have come up, not only from Dennis Allen and Mickey Loomis over at the Saints Golf Classic or the Celebrity Golf Classic, but we'll also get our first exposure to OTAs. So we're going to have a lot of information for you coming out of OTAs as well. So you won't want to miss that. We'll have all that ready for you in tomorrow's episode. So what I want to look at right now is how the New Orleans Saints, in keeping Marshon Lattimore, are set to have, again, one of the NFL's best secondaries. Keeping Marshon Lattimore solidifies this. You've got Paulson Adebo, who's played stellar. You've got Marshon Lattimore, who is a superstar. You've got Tyrann Mathieu lining up at safety for you. You got Alontae Taylor in the slot. Maybe an opportunity for him to prove that he can perform a little bit better there. Maybe he's had the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more, take some steps forward. Even at his worst, this New Orleans Saints secondary was still really good, and one of the better ones in the NFL when healthy. Now, the when healthy conversation will always be a part of the question mark, particularly when it comes to the position as a whole. I don't just want to individualize that around Marshon Lattimore. Staying healthy maintains your talent at the position one way or another. So just looking at the cornerback spot, you've got three guys that you're really comfortable putting their hands on a wide receiver and saying, you're not catching any passes. You know what I mean? Like, you're really comfortable with all three of these guys on an island. You're really comfortable with all three of these guys, in particular, you two guys on the outside, with being guys that can take away the team's best receiver. We've seen it over and over again with Paulson Adebo, with Marshon Lattimore, and for all of the grief that Alontae Taylor gets for his struggling with the adjustment, I guess is fair to say, to go to the slot, he's still a guy that completely erased Mike Evans his rookie year in a game. Let's not forget just how talented he is, even though he's learning a new position, and that's going to take some time. So even if you get all three of those guys out on the field, or you get Kool-Aid McKinstry in there somewhere, a guy that has played in Nick Saban's defense, a guy that was inarguably the best cornerback in this year's class, but unfortunately didn't have the flashy combine numbers or interviews to really maintain him being the #1 corner drafted. But he was a guy that a lot of people saw as the best corner on the board, who has played in a system that's very similar and very familiar to what the New Orleans Saints do. It's easy to see where you're going to end up having an impact there, and like where he can fit and actually be a player that contributes as soon as he has the opportunity to get out on the field. The biggest question will be, where does he have the opportunity to get out on the field, and how soon does that happen? But we know that we're probably going to see him to some extent his rookie year. So I think the thing that becomes most intriguing and most sort of solidifies just how talented this cornerback room is that you're already starting to struggle with who starts where. And it's because of how good the talent is at the position. Now, you hope that Alontae Taylor takes the steps forward that I'm sure he would love to take when it comes to playing in the slot. And as soon as he's able to do that, I think everything becomes a little bit more comfortable. But up until then, figuring out the right configuration of these players shouldn't be that hard when you already have the two perimeter guys figured out. Then, since we're talking about the secondary as a whole, we shouldn't limit the conversation to just the cornerbacks. Let's take a look at the safeties. I mentioned Tyrann Mathieu, a guy that can play down at the line of scrimmage. Heck, he can play in the slot if you need him to. You could start Jordan Howden at free safety, Jonathan Abram at strong safety, move Tyrann Mathieu to the slot, and then all of a sudden you've got two really, really good backup corners ready to jump in case you need it on the outside, and Alontae, Taylor, and Kool-Aid McKinstry. Like, there's a lot of really interesting and intriguing things that the New Orleans Saints could potentially do going into 2024. But the Tyrann Mathieu factor is a major factor. This isn't just the guy that goes out there and like runs the communication and helps to make other players around him better. He is still playing at a high level right now, and he was one of the Saints' best defenders just last season. So even though he's quote unquote on the older side, I say as a guy that's older than he is, you wouldn't trust me out on the football field. I get that, but you would definitely trust Tyrann Mathieu still out on the football field. So I think that when you have a guy that can come in and just educate everyone around him in a way that carries the specificity of the needle moving that a guy like Tyrann Mathieu does, that just elevates the rest of that unit. It's part of what makes them better. It's not just the on-field stuff. It's the game prep. It's the film watching. It's all these other things. Tyrann Mathieu embodies all of that. And Tyrann Mathieu also exudes all of that, leads by example with all that. But what I like about Tyrann Mathieu the most is that he's not just a lead by example guy. He's a vocal dude. He's the one that stood up in a meeting and challenged the defensive backs ahead of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game last year, where they absolutely decimated Baker Mayfield in the second Tampa Bay game. Sorry, not the first one, the second Tampa Bay game. But Tyrann Mathieu was the one that went up and said, hey, this is on us, as in the defensive backs, the secondary. We have to play better. We have to be better in clutch moments. And they performed incredibly well, including Alontae Taylor, who went in on the outside and he almost immediately got an interception, his first career interception against Baker Mayfield down the left side. This is the difference maker that Tyrann Mathieu is, not just as a guy that has gotten multiple takeaways in each of his 2 seasons with the New Orleans Saints, immediately having an impact of getting the ball back to the offense, but is also somebody that helps to pull that out of other players in his position group as a leader, not just a lead by example guy, but by challenging them, by being a vocal leader. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Tyrann Mathieu. Now, one of the things that's going to have a big impact on the New Orleans Saints outlook in the secondary is who starts next to Tyrann. Jonathan Abram played incredibly well over the course of those last 2 games, starting with that same Tampa Bay game that we mentioned, where he took part in 3 different takeaways in that game, had some role in 3 different takeaways in that game. And then up against Atlanta, he was awesome there too, was just aggressive, playing with his head on fire, just really brought a lot of that kind of CJ Gardner-Johnson swagger back to the defense, because he was yapping, he was talking, he was hyping other guys up. He was going out there making plays, all that. I think that he probably has the inside track to starting next to Tyrann Mathieu, but you can't rule out Will Harris, who they added, who can play anywhere on your secondary. Jordan Howden, who held down that Marcus May strong safety role next to Tyrann Mathieu for every other game outside of when Jonathan Abram got those 2 starts when Jordan Howden was sick during that practice week. Then you have other guys like Millard Bradford coming in as a UDFA who could potentially steal a spot on the roster. There's a lot of opportunity here. My biggest thing, just in looking at the style of player that the Saints are going to be looking for there, is that if Tyrann Mathieu is still playing free safety and doesn't, they don't do something crazy like what I suggested, or not what I suggested, but what I mentioned could be a possibility of moving Tyrann Mathieu in the slot, then that would change everything. But if they don't go that route, which seems unlikely, but we'll see, having Jordan Howden in next to Tyrann Mathieu is kind of repetitive. You've got 2 guys that play really, really well away from the football. Now, Tyrann Mathieu can play well down in the box, so maybe you shift Tyrann Mathieu's responsibilities to fit more of the Marcus May responsibilities. But man, he just played so well in his own right last year, then I don't think you want to fix what ain't broken, right? So can Jordan Howden learn the strong safety role, play a little bit differently down back in the box, or does Jordan Howden get that opportunity? If Jordan Howden gets that, or does Jonathan Abram take that opportunity? If Jonathan Abram takes that opportunity, it's because he's better suited for the role. It's not a bad thing for Jordan Howden, who effectively becomes the next man up behind Tyrann Mathieu. So not a bad gig to have if you're Jordan Howden, one way or another. So this should be one of the stronger secondaries in the NFL if Marshon Lattimore is indeed not traded away. And this makes the New Orleans Saints as a whole a bit of a better team going into 2024 than we might have expected when expecting the Marshon Lattimore trade. All right, y'all, coming up tomorrow, more updates as well as, of course, OTA updates in tomorrow's episode with our first day of OTAs. I'm so excited that we are back at it on the football field. Can't wait. Got much more coming for you this week here on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, making it your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans, as well as Caroline Fitton over at Locked On LSU. And stay tuned with everything going on within Locked On Louisiana. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.